She used to believe that silence was peace, that the quiet moments between two people, a shared cup of tea, a sunset watched from the same porch, were proof of love. But over time, she learned that silence can also be the sound of two hearts drifting apart. Elena had married for love, not for status, not for comfort, but for that inexplicable pull that makes one soul trust another. When she looked at Daniel in their younger years, there was laughter in her eyes and promise in his. They weren't rich, but they were rich in dreams. Their tiny apartment was filled with secondhand furniture and first-rate affection. In those days, love felt easy like breathing. They'd talk late into the night about everything and nothing, their future, their fears, the kind of parents they hoped to be one day. He would hold her hand across the kitchen table as the candle burned low, and she'd think, this is enough. But time, as it always does, began to whisper other truths. After their son was born, Daniel grew quieter. The man who once filled the room with laughter now filled it with unspoken worries. He worked longer hours, and Elena convinced herself it was love that every hour he gave to his job was a sacrifice for their family. She stayed up waiting for him, meals growing cold, her heart growing colder. She told herself marriage was about endurance, that the vows she had made for better or worse meant staying even when the worse lasted longer than expected. Years slipped by like that. The sound of cutlery clinking at dinner replaced conversation. Their son Adam grew up watching a mother smile too politely and a father sigh too deeply. Elena became the keeper of peace, the one who filled silence with small talk, laughter that never reached her eyes, and an endless effort to keep things from falling apart. But there was one thing she didn't notice right away, that the quiet wasn't just between them anymore. It was inside her too. She had stopped hearing her own thoughts. Until one morning, something changed. It wasn't an argument. It wasn't betrayal. It was breakfast. Daniel sat across from her, reading the paper as usual, while the sunlight spilled across the table. She looked at him, really looked, and saw a stranger. His face was familiar, but his eyes no longer met hers. And for the first time, she didn't feel sad. She felt nothing. That nothing scared her more than any fight could. Because that's when she realized, love doesn't always end with thunder. Sometimes it fades quietly until you're living beside someone who used to know your soul, and now doesn't even know what makes you smile. That day, she didn't cry. She simply washed the dishes, tied her hair back, and went about her routine. But somewhere deep inside, a decision had begun to bloom, slow, steady, and certain. Weeks later, she found herself sitting on the edge of their bed, watching Daniel sleep. The man she had once prayed for, fought for, waited for, now seemed like a memory still breathing beside her. She whispered to the quiet room, "I'm still here. But I don't know why." He didn't stir. That's when she understood love had left long before she did. Soft CTA. If this story already speaks to you, take a breath. Leave a like and subscribe for more calm, real-life stories that whisper truths we often forget to say aloud. The next morning, Elena packed Adam's lunch, ironed Daniel's shirt, and stood by the window as the sun rose. The silence was still there, but this time she didn't try to fill it. She listened to it, and in that stillness, she heard something she hadn't heard in years, her own voice. Quiet, but clear. You can love someone deeply and still choose to walk away. Elena didn't leave right away. People imagine that the moment of awakening is dramatic bags packed, doors slammed, tears running down cheeks. But for her, it was quieter than that. She began with small goodbyes, to the routines that had numbed her, to the hopes that no longer fit the woman she had become. She stopped pretending. At breakfast, when Daniel asked about her day, she no longer answered with the rehearsed fine. Instead, she said nothing at all. Not out of anger, but because she finally understood her silence now belonged to her, not to him. One afternoon, while folding laundry, she found the old photo album they used to keep on the living room shelf. Dust clung to its corners. The first page showed them on their wedding day, Daniel in a suit too big for his frame, Elena in a dress she'd sewn with her mother. Their smiles were unguarded, their eyes full of promise. She ran her fingers over the image, tracing the life they had built and lost. She closed the album gently, like saying goodbye to a ghost. That evening, when Daniel came home, she didn't ask about his day. She didn't reach for him or try to fill the space between them. And oddly, he didn't notice. That was her answer. The next few weeks unfolded like a quiet unraveling. She moved through their home as though walking through a museum of her own memories. The kitchen where laughter once echoed, the hallway where arguments lived, the porch where she'd waited for him to come home. Each place whispered a truth. She had stayed out of duty, not love. When Adam turned 16, she knew she couldn't keep pretending for his sake. She didn't want him to grow up thinking love meant staying silent, or that sacrifice was the same as affection. So, one morning, she wrote a letter. It wasn't long, just a few lines. She placed it on Daniel's pillow before sunrise, then sat for a while by the window, watching the sky shift from gray to gold. I once believed silence meant peace, but now I know it can also mean absence. I hope you find your voice again. I've found mine. When she stood up to leave, she didn't pack much, a few clothes, a notebook, and her mother's locket. She paused at the door, half expecting him to call her name, to ask her to stay. But the only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator, and the wind brushing through the curtains. She stepped out anyway. The world outside was strangely bright. For years, she had measured her life by the walls of that house, the ticking clock, the familiar footsteps, the routine smiles. Now the open road felt infinite. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't go back. In the days that followed, there were moments of doubt, loneliness that crept in during long nights, guilt that whispered she'd failed as a wife, as a mother. But with every sunrise, she began to understand something deeper. Leaving didn't mean she stopped loving. It meant she started listening. She found a small place by the sea, a modest apartment with cracked paint and a window that framed the horizon. Every morning she'd sit with her tea, watching the tide come and go. The ocean became her teacher, reminding her that retreat and return are both parts of love's rhythm. She started writing again, small notes at first, reflections about her days, the way light shifts across the water, the sound of the waves when the world is asleep. Slowly, those notes turned into stories about love that fades, about courage that whispers, about women who choose themselves not out of pride, but peace. Months later, Adam came to visit. He was taller, older, quieter, just like his father once was. He didn't ask why she left. He just hugged her, long and wordless. Then softly he said, "Dad reads your letters." She smiled faintly. "And what does he say?" Adam looked down. "He doesn't, but I think he's listening now." That night, Elena sat by the sea again, the moonlight spilling across her hands. She thought about Daniel not with anger, but with gratitude. They had loved once. They had tried. And sometimes, trying is the most honest form of love there is. As the waves rolled in, she whispered to herself, "Silence used to separate us. Now it sets me free." And for the first time in years, the quiet felt like peace again. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever stayed too long where love no longer spoke, take a moment to breathe. Leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more calm, real-life stories that remind us that even endings can be beginnings in disguise. Because sometimes, the softest goodbyes are the ones that echo the longest.